Welcome to Beyond the Coverage. I'm Chris Horner. In today's episode, I want to talk about how impressive the 24 season was for Tadej Pogačar. He started the season 36 on the Pro Cycling Stats all-time list of favorites throughout the cycling history. Eddie Merckx is number one up there at the top, and Tadej Pogačar was 36 at the beginning of the season. Fast forward to the end of Tour of Lombardy at yesterday's last big race of the professional season. Well, Tadej Pogačar has moved himself all the way up to 17th on the all-time Pro Cycling Stats. That's a huge leap. If you look at the 16 in front of there of Tadej Pogačar, well, it's only Alejandro Valverde in 6th. He raced for a long time, finished racing at like 42, 43 years of age before he's done. Still races a little bit right now, so he's just backed off the throttle some while he's doing some gravel races. But the next rider that's in this modern time here is Laurent Jalabert. I got the pleasure of racing against both those two riders, and Laurent Jalabert, who's sitting 9th on the all-time list, was a rider that every time the race started, everybody feared Laurent Jalabert. I can still vividly remember in the meetings with FDJ in the late 90s, where my director sportif, Alain Galopin, he would say, okay, Jalabert is going to win the race, but what can we do if there's some kind of mess up there? How can we play this tactically? But the meeting started with Laurent Jalabert being the outright favorite, where if they do everything right, you can't beat the guy. We had to play tactics on what we could do if something had a mishap there with Laurent Jalabert or with his Once teammates, and then possibly there was a window of opportunity for a team like FDJ to slip in there. Very, very, very sliver of window of opportunity, but that's how feared Laurent Jalabert was. You fast forward a few more years and you start talking about Alejandro Valverde. It was the same scenario with the Spaniard, where everybody feared him going into the week-long races. Everybody feared him at the one-day big races when we're talking about the classics, like Liège-Bastogne-Liège, Flèche-Wallonne, and of course Amstel Gold. When you started those races at Amstel Gold, going through Flèche and then finishing at Liège-Bastogne-Liège, it was a showdown that you knew was coming and a smack in the face that you were going to get. Well, Tadej Pogačar has even upped the level a little bit more, up from those riders that are 6th and 9th on the modern era there of the Pro Cycling Stats, and brought himself into a sphere that Garrett says, who's sitting behind the camera right now, that we need to redo the pages. Page 1 should just list Tadej Pogačar, and the other 5 favorites that I have on my page 1 should be page 2, and then everyone else is page 3. And he's got a lot to argue with right there. I don't even know if I could argue with Garrett behind the camera right now saying that Tadej Pogačar should be the only guy on page 1. And we just bumped Jonas Vingegaard, Primož Roglič, Remco Evenepoel, Wout van Aert, and Mathieu van der Poel to page 2, and everyone else is page 3. I'm not going to get that crazy right now, because I know Tadej Pogačar, if he loses 1%, 2%, all of a sudden Jonas Vingegaard on fine form, especially if you go back to the 23 Tour de France Stage 16's individual time trial. Jonas Vingegaard put on a level of fitness there at that individual time trial that outright beat everybody in the world of professional cycling, including Tadej Pogačar on that individual TT. There's no doubt about it. That was spectacular. So you know Jonas Vingegaard can find that kind of form to come up to the level we saw with Tadej Pogačar. But let me remind you guys, Tadej Pogačar has held the 24 season type form that we saw in yesterday's Tour of Lombardy all the way from March 2nd till the end of the race there at Tour of Lombardy. It's remarkable. And if we take a little deeper dive into the 24 season, I would say on paper, the only day that Tadej Pogačar didn't have Tadej Pogačar type form of complete domination is we would go into Quebec, where the one-day race up there in Canada that he lost. And I would say he still had the best form in Quebec, without a doubt. I would say tactically he just hesitated a little bit because he had a sprinter on his wheel, Arnaud Delis, going over that climb. And once we go into just about 1 kilometer, 1.5 kilometer to go, Tadej Pogačar, just coming back at his first race after the Tour de France, domination of 6 individual stage victories and the general classification. Of course, he's coming back from that race, so he's got in his mind, he doesn't know exactly how good his form is, and he looks back and he sees Arnaud Delis on his wheel. So that's why you see the hesitation there from the Slovenian, because he doesn't want to bring, of course, a sprinter up to the line and lose Quebec City. But that was the only day. 11 individual races he did in 24 season, and that was the only one where Tadej Pogačar's form wasn't on Tadej Pogačar type level. Otherwise, he was magnificent. That type of form I have never seen throughout my career, especially witnessing it firsthand. Like I said, Laurent Jalabert, and when we talk about Alejandro Valverde, the current guys that are in the top 10 of the pro cycling stats, those guys were feared, but Tadej Pogačar's level is just so good that he's able to solo from 81 kilometers out at big races and from just about 50 kilometers out at monument races, where this year at Lombardy and again at Liège-Bastogne-Liège, he's winning solo monument individual one-day races from far out, where Alejandro Valverde and Laurent Jalabert used a lot of their speed at the finish to be able to win a lot of those races that they had. Now keep in mind, those guys have raced 10, 15, 20 years to get themselves up in the top 10. Tadej Pogačar, well, he's just a young kid still, right? He's 26 years of age. And when I show you that, when we compare him to the other Slovenian, Primož Roglič, who I have third on my first page list, Garrett has him second on his second page list. Well, we started looking at Primož Roglič. He has 88 victories on the pro cycling stats, and Tadej Pogačar has 88 victories that tie there with Primož Roglič. But they have 8 years between them, with Primož Roglič being 34 years of age and Tadej Pogačar, like I already said, being 26 years of age. That means that Tadej Pogačar still has 8 more years to catch up to Primož Roglič, but we'll probably see that next season. Now, how fragile of this kind of form of Tadej Pogačar could it be? Well, first off, on the second page of Garrett's list and the first page of mine, when we're talking about Jonas Vingegaard, Primož Roglič, and Remco Evenepoel, if those riders could just stay healthy through the season, we saw here in the 24 season, of course, on stage 4 of the Basque Country, where all 3 of those riders crashed, that took a bunch of that form. When we look back at Tour of Lombardy and some of the spectacular wins of Tadej Pogačar, well, it helps a little bit when those riders are suffering just a little bit more, starting the Tour de France in the 24 season, coming in the Tour of Lombardy, where Remco Evenepoel's form has started to taper off here late in the season. Still was magnificent. Congratulations. Second place at Tour of Lombardy is nothing to bark about. It is a fantastic win still. But when we started looking at it, his form dropped a little bit. Tadej Pogačar's form never dropped through the season, with the exception there of that Quebec City race. That's the only time his level dropped, and as I said, he was still the best in the race. Now, if I go a little bit deeper and we want to start covering some of the races that he lost this year here, well, we know it's Milan-San Remo early in the season. It was the race that follows Strade Bianche's 81-kilometer solo ride. When he got into Milan-San Remo, he did lose there. Mathieu van der Poel was on fantastic form, did a great job of following Tadej Pogačar up over the Cipressa and the Poggio, especially when you're going up the last and final climb there at Milan-San Remo. Mathieu van der Poel was spectacular to stay with Tadej Pogačar. But those races, when we're talking about Milan-San Remo, is going to always be a hard race for Tadej Pogačar to win. But he just needs Mathieu van der Poel to be a little bit off on form, and he needs Wout van Aert not to start Milan-San Remo in future years here that are coming up with top form like we've seen Wout van Aert. Otherwise, Tadej Pogačar is going to have Mathieu van der Poel and Wout van Aert following him when we're talking about going up the Cipressa and the Poggio, where it's a 5% climb. Those 2 riders on top form are always going to follow. But of course, if Remco Evenepoel, Primož Roglič decide they want to do Milan-San Remo too, then Tadej Pogačar has other dilemmas coming into Milan-San Remo where he won't be able to drop those riders either, and we'll see a tactical battle, could be with first-page riders coming into the finish there, and then Tadej Pogačar has to win with tactics, or he has to win with speed at the end of, well, we'll call it 300K race there at Milan-San Remo, and then Tadej Pogačar can get that win. But personally, I think Tadej Pogačar has better odds of going to Paris-Roubaix and being able to win there. Now, when I jump backwards again just a little bit and talk about the 24 season and the losses, I don't think it's Milan-San Remo, and I don't think Quebec City really qualifies so much as losses for Tadej Pogačar. So if we want to dive a little bit deeper, what would be the outright losses that I think of the 24 season that Tadej Pogačar experienced? Well, I think you got to go into the Tour de France. You got to go into the 2024 Tour de France and look at stage 7, the individual time trial, where the Belgian rider Remco Evenepoel beat Tadej Pogačar outright. That day right there is indisputable. Remco Evenepoel is the better of the 2 riders because he's a time trial specialist, but he's also racing for GC. So when we look at Remco Evenepoel, he had to ride hard on all those individual stages the 6 days before that fight for GC and come into the individual time trial and still beat Tadej Pogačar. That was the one for sure loss that Tadej Pogačar had. And if I fast forward you into stage 11 of that year's Tour de France in 2024, where he lost to Jonas Vingegaard, I believe outright Jonas Vingegaard beat him on that stage too, but that was more of a fault where Tadej Pogačar's inexperience and his lack of paying attention to tactics let him lose that race to Jonas Vingegaard because, one, he forgot to eat enough, and I believe he was down on calories, but had he not attacked as soon or used other teammates like Adam Yates putting more pressure before he threw in his attack, I don't think Jonas Vingegaard brings him back, but I'll give Tadej Pogačar the loss. So instead of Milan-San Remo and Quebec City as the two losses in 2024 season, I think the more important ones to look at would be stage 7 individual time trial, the Tour, and stage 11 being the outright loss Tadej Pogačar experienced in the 24 season. I can take apart a few other races and we can go into stage 1 of the Giro d'Italia, but this is team tactics that are at play. Now, if you're the team leader and you're Tadej Pogačar, you're the one that should be able to understand how strong your teammates are, understand how the pace is going to affect your teammates. So when we look at stage 1 of the Giro d'Italia, and we see there was Mikkel Bjerg that was blowing up his teammates on the penultimate climb, that left Tadej Pogačar without Rafał Majka to start that last final climb that was so close to the finish at about 1.5 kilometers in terms of pitch. If he had Rafał Majka there fresh starting into that climb, leading Tadej Pogačar into that right corner at the front, then, of course, Rafał Majka drilling it up the first few hundred meters, Tadej Pogačar would have soloed stage 1 of the Giro d'Italia, would have won that stage, beat Jonathan Narvaez from Ineos, because I don't believe he would have even been on his wheel, and would have carried the pink jersey from the Giro d'Italia from stage 1 all the way to the finish, which, if we kept those 6 stage victories that Tadej Pogačar had at this year's 24 Giro, you could add one more. That would have given him 7 stage victories. Why is that important? Well, when we look a little bit further into the Tour de France and to the Giro d'Italia of 2024, well, Tadej Pogačar ended up with 12 individual stages. That is tied with Wout van Aert's whole career of individual Grand Tour stage victories for the big guy from Belgium. So in 1 year, Tadej Pogačar matched individual Grand Tour victories that Wout van Aert, the big guy, who we all believe could have magnificent numbers, big numbers of individual stage Grand Tour wins. But Tadej Pogačar has matched in the 24 season all of the years that Wout van Aert has, and we'll count probably 4 or 5 seasons of Wout van Aert compared to Tadej Pogačar's 124 season. That's how dominant the Slovenian was here in 2024. It was a remarkable season. Hope you guys love the takes here. I'll bring you some more stuff, of course, on Beyond the Coverage. And, of course, we'll have some Chris Horner Corners coming up here in the winter of the 2024 year. So like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys on the next edition real soon.